Call this meeting of the Subcommittee on Veterans Affairs to order. Honorables sénateurs et sénatrices, aujourd'hui, nous allons continuer notre étude du projet de loi C-27, loi modifiant la loi sur l'emploi dans la fonction publique, accès élargi à l'embauche pour certains militaires et anciens militaires des forces canadiennes. Today, from the Department of Veterans Affairs, we're very pleased to welcome the Honourable Erin O'Toole, the new Minister of Veterans Affairs. And, Minister, this is the first opportunity that we in this committee, at least in the Senate, have had to congratulate you on your appointment. We're very pleased to learn of your appointment and look forward to working with you.
Thank you very much, Senator Day.
Thank you. And I will introduce the others who are with you, if I may. General retired Walt Natinchuk, who's the new Deputy Minister, and equally we're very, very proud that you were appointed to that position and look forward to working with you, Mr. Natinchuk. And Maureen Sinnott, who is the Director General, Finance Division and Acting Chief Financial Officer. Ms. Sinnott, I think you and I have met before along the way, and welcome back. And Bernard Butler, you have more adjectives attached to your title than anyone else. He's the Acting Associate Assistant Deputy Minister. There is a prize for that here, you know. Policy, communications, and commemorations. And commemorations are very, very important to this committee, as you're fully aware. Minister O'Toole, I give the floor to you. We're dealing primarily with C-27, but you're the minister.
Thank you very much, Senator Day. Monsieur le Président, honorables sénateurs, je suis heureux de faire ma première apparition officielle devant le comité en tant que ministre des Anciens Combattants. It is an honor for me to appear before this body today because, like me, you share a passion for serving the men and women who served Canada. And in particular, Senator Day, it's good to see you. Between my Deputy Minister, yourself, and myself, the Royal Military College of Canada is well represented here today. And thank you for your service, both in uniform and in Canada's Parliament. If you'd indulge, ladies and gentlemen, for a few moments, I'll tell you why this opportunity to serve as Minister of Veterans Affairs is so important to me on a personal level and as a parliamentarian. At 18, I attended RMC and joined the Canadian Armed Forces. And that was a transformative part of my life, and very proud to serve alongside some exceptional men and women from across Canada during my 12 years in the military. I then transitioned out of the Canadian Armed Forces, like all veterans do, and that's why the transition piece, which is essentially the focus of your Senate study, is such a critical area to not only study, understand, but also to improve, to ensure that there's more and more men and women having a seamless and smooth transition to civilian life after they serve, whether it's a few years of service or whether it's 40 years of service. The transition can often be daunting. Like many young Canadians, I joined the military at 18 and didn't write a resume again until I was applying to jobs as a lawyer. And the longer you serve in uniform, the more detached you are from applying for a job, interviewing, these sorts of things. So while we empower our men and women to serve Canada around the world with distinction and with courage, often that transition can be uncomfortable because it's a change. And the transition also impacts the service member's family, decisions about where to live, where to work, and then, of course, health is at the epicenter. So my transition was a smooth one. And then when I established my second career, I devoted a considerable amount of time to trying to serve my comrades that were still in uniform. So through my work with True Patriot Love Foundation, with the Legion, with the Royal Military College Board of Governors, with great groups of Canadians across the country like Wounded Warriors, like BCIT, so many of the great witnesses that appeared before your committee, I had the great fortune of working with prior to becoming a parliamentarian. So reviewing your report was a great reminder to me of how many Canadians out there, whether they served or not, are promoting a higher veteran culture, are helping men and women transition, are helping some of our ill and injured veterans transition into a new life post-military. And so I'm really glad that you not only heard from our department, which prides itself on serving veterans, but the groups across the country that have been doing exceptional work in this regard. And to see their remarks reflected in your report, it was very reassuring for me as minister. So if you would indulge a few more minutes, Senator Day, I would like to touch on a few of the important parts of your report that I appreciated in particular. The government certainly commends the report and agrees with the spirit of your recommendations fully. And as you note throughout the report, many of the modernization efforts to improve the transition for people post-military were initiatives of our government, and we're committed to continuing to make that transition a smooth one for the veteran and their family. So first, I'd like to speak to the Life After Service study, and which it's probably the best point for me to start off with because it was your first area of recommendation. So this is an opportunity for us to continue to work on the Life After Service study commenced in 2010 with Statistics Canada expertise to sample our veterans, an actually far superior approach to the old client satisfaction survey that was in the news this week, which was rightly criticized for not doing enough data drilling down on groups that need particular attention in the transition. So what I would like to see, and I've directed the department already to actually expand the next Life After Service survey to drill down on two particular groups that your committee highlighted as needing particular attention. That the most important group being the ill and injured, which you highlight at page 14 of your report, which have a higher incidence of unemployment post-career in the Canadian Armed Forces. That's a group that we need to get better survey information on so that we can improve vocational rehabilitation programming. As you know, Senators, because you mentioned in your report, our government has increased the envelope of funds available for an individual veteran in the vocational rehabilitation and education space to $75,000 per veteran. So we've been increasing the opportunity for veterans to make a strong transition to civilian career. But clearly the first group that needs more analysis on where there's challenges are those people, the 1,200 or so per year that medically release from the Canadian Armed Forces. So I've asked that the Life After Service survey do a deeper dive on that subset. So of the 5,000 or so that release each year, that 1,200 is an acute group that we need to know more about so that we can refine some of our programming for them. The other group I'd like to highlight here, which you've also highlighted in several instances throughout your report, and I appreciated the comments of Andrea Sue from the Royal Canadian Legion, was releasing women, female veterans, which also we don't have a lot of data on, even though in the last 25 years there's been more and more women serving with distinction in the Canadian Armed Forces, and better understanding transition challenges they face, better understanding why they have higher incidence of unemployment than other veterans is something we need more data on so that we can make better and more informed public policy decisions. Overall, it's refreshing that your report showed that on average veterans have a lower unemployment rate than the general population. But those two subsets, our medically released veterans and women, are subsets of the veterans population that I would like more data on. And the Life After Service survey is a perfect opportunity to bring the expertise of Statistics Canada and the department to bear on those specific subsets. And in fact, Mr. Stouffer and others who've been critical of the client satisfaction survey in the past, I think, would find this to be a smart approach to get important data on a very important group. Two other items, Senators, I'd like to touch on, although I did find with interest everything in your report to be very thorough and helpful in our pursuit of service excellence. But the second piece recognizes that the Department of National Defence and Veterans Affairs Canada, which for 50 years have operated almost as two distinct entities, have been making great strides in the last 5 years in terms of collaborating. And in the Veterans 2020 mission statement that I've been refining and sharing with veterans groups and stakeholders, making the department at every level, in every position, veteran-centric, focused on veterans and their families. The second principle of the mission statement is that seamless transition from uniform. So the very fact that your second and several other recommendations focus on that is good. And the Canadian Transition Assistance Programs, the bundling together of what's offered by the Canadian Armed Forces and what is offered by Veterans Affairs Canada, is going to be a unique area of continued focus. I think both departments have made great strides to collaborate better. And even in your own report, you say more could be done to assist prior to the release of the serving member. Senators, I hope you'd be happy to find out that that's been an area of particular focus in my first few months as minister, closing that gap. And in fact, I've been very encouraged working with General Latinchuk, my deputy, on strengthening that continued collaboration between the Department of National Defence and Veterans Affairs. General Miller, the Chief of Military Personnel, has been at specific working meetings on closing this gap. I see progress, but we're striving for more. And here's why I highlight it. Going back to the challenge we face with medically releasing veterans, on average, a medically releasing veteran serves 3 to 5 years in uniform post-incident, post-medical issue through to release. We've got to use that 3 to 5 years better, Senators, and our department is already making great strides to do that. That is a core part of your recommendations. We would like to see a day where once a career medical review board is ordered for a man and woman based on an injury, that Veterans Affairs immediately becomes involved in the wellness and the planning for that serving member. The goal is recovery and return to work in the Canadian Armed Forces, and that's what anyone who's been injured in active duty wants to do. They want to get back to their comrades. They want to get back to their post. And if they do, Veterans Affairs has started a file and has started collaborating with DND. But if they don't, and medical release is on the horizon, let's have the disability assessment, let's have vocational rehabilitation, which does start before release through CISIP and through Veterans Affairs. Let's have more resources to use that time. In recent years, our government has stood up the Joint Personnel Support Units around bases. So these injured men and women are part of a JPSU. Let's use that time where the man or woman is making 100% salary, where they're in uniform, and where their family is in a posting in a community that they're comfortable with. So that's an area of particular focus for me, and I was very glad to see it in your report, and I'm very appreciative of Minister Kenney and senior leadership of the Canadian Armed Forces for making this a priority as well. Finally, Mr. Chair and Senators, the last area I'd like to just briefly highlight is another successful initiative by our government, the Veterans Transition Advisory Council, which I'm happy to say I advised on as a board member of the True Patriot Love Foundation before I became a member of Parliament. I applauded Minister Blaney at the time who was then Veterans Affairs Minister, for reaching out to senior private sector leaders to try and generate a hire a veteran culture in Canada. And your report dedicates considerable time and attention to successes in the U.S. on that front, and terrific groups in Canada that are working on this effort. Canada Company and their military employment program, Wounded Warriors and some of their work with employers, the True Patriot Love Foundation, and other individual initiatives at places like the Royal Bank, at McDonald's, at Home Depot. That's certainly very encouraging to see, and we need to foster a culture that does more of that. Because the Navigator survey highlighted at page 26 of your report, the most frustrating number for someone who served and then worked in corporate Canada was that 4% statistic that you cite in your report that Jamie Watt highlighted before your committee, that only 4% of the employers surveyed expressed an interest in developing and implementing a Hire a Veteran program in the country, in their company. We have to work on that, and this is an area where I think Veterans Affairs Canada, the Canadian Armed Forces, the Government of Canada, and we've set the tone with the Hiring Veterans Act and opening up public service priority hiring for injured veterans. This is a place that nonprofits, the private sector, and the government can work together to promote a Hire a Veteran culture. And as I've said in the House countless times, to show that it's not just altruistic, it's not just a good thing to do because these men and women served us, it's accretive to their business because you're getting people that are inherently loyal. They've been in the regimental structure of the military. They're inherently loyal to your organization at a time where a huge cost for companies is rehiring and training people in high turnover jobs. So I think businesses, when they understand you're getting men and women with exceptional experience, team skills, a track record of working under pressure, collaborating, high education, high training, this isn't just the nice thing to do, it's a very smart business decision. So I was very, very happy to see extensive coverage of that issue in your report. I think you'll see more of that under my watch as minister. So that's what I wanted to highlight on. I wanted to thank you for your study and for your report, and I'm prepared to take questions.
Mr. Minister, thank you very much for those compliments and to have thoroughly reviewed our report. We had some very good witnesses, and I think the report is reflective of the good witnesses that we had. With respect to C-27 that we'll be dealing with for the next 2 or 3 meetings, we would like to get that back to the main Senate body. We had last week 2 witnesses, the 2 ombudsmen, one for veterans and the other for Canadian Armed Forces. And they seem to be of one mind with respect to one aspect, and maybe you could comment on that, because I think you've talked about transitioning veterans, and during that period of time when after an injury, these are the injured veterans, before they exit, they take the uniform off. There's an attribution to, that the injury or the medical reason can be attributable to service and to activity while serving. The 2 ombudsmen felt that that assessment could better be done while the individual is in that period after the injury, before the uniform is removed, rather than, as the Act now provides, for the attribution test to be done by Veterans Affairs. The implication was that Veterans Affairs wouldn't be doing that until after the person is out of uniform, and therefore there's going to be a delay problem here. Can you help us with that?
I certainly can, Senator, and thank you for the question. I was hoping that question would be raised. And we're in a great position that we have passionate advocates in both the Ombudsman, both the National Defense Ombudsman and the Veterans Affairs Ombudsman, Mr. Perron, who I work closely with. And the D&D Ombudsman came from the Veterans Affairs Ombudsman's office. So this is an area where I think both share a need to improve in this space. And you'll notice, Senator Day, that I highlighted this as the second point of my presentation to you based on your report, is I sincerely hope that the National Defense Ombudsman suggestion here will be eliminated, the need for it will be eliminated by our changes on making better use of collaboration in that 3 to 5 year span for a medically releasing veteran. I see why he made that suggestion, because he's saying, you're injured in uniform, let's let D&D take care of that. The issue is we at Veterans Affairs have that expertise, and now that we're going to be collaborating far earlier in the Canadian Forces life of that future veteran, we will eliminate the delay and frustration that the Ombudsman highlighted. I see why he made his suggestion, but why would we create a second parallel review type body when that expertise is resident within Veterans Affairs? The problem has been really not using that time when the serving member is at the Joint Personnel Support Unit. They've had their injury. They're recovering, and we all hope, as I said, they recover and redeploy or go back to their unit. But if they don't, and if Veterans Affairs is activated after the injury or before the Career Medical Review Board, we can use that time when they're still in uniform, still in the Canadian Armed Forces, to assess the injury, to start rehabilitation, both medical and vocational, provide supports to the family, so that by the time they hang up their uniform, all of those questions are resolved, and that's my commitment.
Thank you very much. I think that's very important to have that on the record. I'll begin with the Honourable Senator Stuart Olson from New Brunswick. Deputy
Thank you,
Chair.
Just briefly, I'm very pleased that this is helping with our veterans in their transition period. I think that's one of the most important parts. Years ago, the Ombudsman raised that with me, and I think this is an ongoing problem that we need to work on. And this particular bill does a lot in that way. When we were speaking, we had the public service people with us last week as well, or the last meeting. The Public Service Employment Act covers what you're trying to do in this bill. I was wondering, are you considering perhaps extending it to Crown Corps and other agencies, the Veterans Hiring Act, to the other agencies that aren't covered by that particular act, but would offer a wider spectrum of employment opportunities for our veterans?
Thank you, Senator Stuart Olson, for that question. And you and I have spoken on a number of occasions. I know how passionate you are on these issues, and I appreciate that. I think we are at with C27 and the culture we're creating, both in the private sector and within government, is a tremendous first start. Mm-hmm. So with the Public Sector Employment Act, we've made available a potential pool of thousands of jobs for priority hiring. What I'm also very careful to say is not every opportunity that comes up will be suitable for a medically releasing veteran. We still want to make sure that people have the right set of skills and qualifications, but there's also geographic issues. The serving member may be in Ontario when they leave the military, but they may decide to go back to Atlantic Canada or Western Canada where they enrolled. So family supports, geographic considerations, all these things factor in to see whether there's going to be a fit. What we have to do as a government, which we've been doing, is actually expand the wider pool of potential employment opportunities. The good thing is this is a big first start with this act. Mm-hmm. There have been basic level communications with other departments and with Crown agencies about adopting the spirit of this act. And I think as you see this roll out over time, and as we take up some of the recommendations of your committee to try and make sure that there's more coordination of these opportunities, both in the public sector and the private sector, to the veterans community. You'll see more organizations, more departments orienting their recruiting, their programming to veterans. The survey conducted by the Veterans Transition Advisory Council, which I looked at because I was an early supporter of VTAC, the human resource departments at a lot of Canadian companies, for instance, didn't even understand military training. I used to use the example, some companies out there don't know the difference between a corporal and a colonel, a light blue uniform and a green uniform. Mm-hmm. So one of the last things I did as part of the True Patriot Love Foundation before running for Parliament was to set up a conference called From Battlefield to Boardroom with wounded warriors, with a group called veterans called Treble Victor, with a number of groups in this sector. And it wasn't just to get companies in the door to showcase some of our exceptional men and women and to educate them. We wanted HR leaders. It was more important for that conference to have a vice president of human resources than it was to have the president of the company, because the HR department are the ones that could make sure that they're considering military experience as being just as valuable as some experience in a rival industry. So I think this is something I've been long passionate about, is in fostering more of a hire a veteran culture in Canada. The Public Service Employment Act is a great first start, a great pool of thousands of potential opportunities for that fit, and I think you'll see it continue as we have better success with that start.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Stuart Olson. Next, I'll go to Senator White, Senator for Ontario.
Thank you very much for being here, folks. I really appreciate you finding the time. When I look at the Veterans Hiring Act, one of the aspects I appreciate the most is the fact that these veterans will be able to move to the front of the line. I think it's helpful to them and even helpful to us. However, having worked in government agencies that aren't controlled under the Public Service Employment Act, I'm just trying to figure out how they fit, the RCMP and others. I think see great opportunities for these veterans having potential employment opportunities in those other agencies. So I'm trying to figure out how we do the reach out to those organizations, particularly the RCMP. They're in 800 communities across Canada, many of which will have veterans returning to that may not have the same access to other public sector employment opportunities. I'll have a second as well, if I may. But yeah, and it might be perfect.
Thank you, Senator White. And I do have to remark, Mr. Chair, that before Ottawa was finally served by the Senator as Chief of Police, the Durham region of Ontario that I have the good fortune. So Ottawa stole our chief, and I was very glad to become his colleague as an MP. That's a really good question, and I think that is our intention over time, is to make sure the ill and injured from our National Police Force can access the same opportunities, and their families. One thing I try and talk about in some of my roundtables as minister is, while I minister Veterans Affairs, I also administer programs for members of the RCMP that Veterans Affairs does for the force, and that's certainly a very important part of my role. And the good thing about that is some of the learnings the Department of National Defence and Veterans Affairs are having on issues like operational stress injuries and things like that are also germane to the RCMP and to police forces and uniform service more generally. So that's certainly our intention, is to make sure that that there are opportunities for people who have served in uniform, both in the military and the RCMP.
I don't think I was clear, though. I guess my concern is veterans who don't have opportunities to work in those agencies that aren't covered by the Public Service Employment Act. And I gave the RCMP as one of those examples. My other question was going to surround actually how RCMP members will be served. I appreciate you knowing what my second question was going to be. But I am concerned that these agencies sit out there. I don't think CBSA is covered either, if I'm correct. But anyway, there are a number of those Crown Corps and agencies that I think have great opportunities for veterans who are going to provinces and territories that have those agencies operating that may not be served. So are we going to include those agencies and Crown Corps because they sit outside of the Act and in fact sit outside this legislation? Deputy, if you may.
Mr. Chair and Senator, my understanding is that the three key organizations that are outside of the Public Service Employment Act are the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, Parks Canada, and CRA. And my understanding is that all three of those organizations have indicated that they will follow the spirit of the Veterans Employment Act, even though they are outside of the Public Service Employment Act. And I've contacted my counterparts in each of those three organizations, and they have, recently, and they've confirmed that when this whole legislation is being discussed, that they would be bound by that, by the Act, and so they will follow the spirit, which is important because a lot of those veterans are outside the national capital, as you know, and those three organizations have a significant number of employees who are coast to coast, and so for those NCOs, those young soldiers, sailors, airmen, and women across the country, there'll be a lot of opportunity with those other organizations.
Mr. Chair, only because he answered two questions when I only asked one, if I could ask a second question, if that's possible.
It's all to the
Absolutely
pretended
related. No,
is,
it's almost identical, actually. It's almost identical. And thank you for that, General. The next question I have, and I asked it last week as well, is, as you know, a lot of our veterans are returning to the old Crow Canada or New Waterford and Cape Breton Island, where there may not be the same opportunities. Have we considered reaching out to provinces and territories and either ask them to adopt what we're doing here or to mirror legislation in the provinces, as we saw after World War II, to ensure that we have as much opportunity as possible for the men and women who will be looking for that employment?
Thank you, Senator. That's a good point to make, and I'm happy to say, while I'm not familiar specifically with provincial responses that are similar to C-27, and I'll let my team answer that, it has been refreshing in the last 5 to 10 years to see other provincial ministries or officials, parliamentarians, provincial parliamentarians, creating a Office of Military Affairs. So I know Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and I believe Alberta had an elected official who had a responsibility for the military community, even though the military, of course, is a federal department, area of federal jurisdiction. It recognized the important role that those families play in the community, not just as employers and the employment impact of Department of National Defense, but the fact that communities like Fredericton, like Edmonton, like Winnipeg, have very large military family and populations, and also large veteran populations, because many will stay near the place of their final posting. So the provinces have been working on these general initiatives. We could report back to the committee on whether there's similar provincial priority hiring, or if my officials know of a specific province that has an act. I think we could see some in the future.
Thank you, Minister. Yes, it's an excellent point, and what I can tell you is that to date, as part of the initiatives that the Minister has identified in terms of the 3 pillars of service excellence, veteran-centric initiatives, and closing the seam, the issue around reaching out to the provinces on issues like employment as it relates to transition have certainly been contemplated. In the past, we have not done that on a formal basis, but there certainly have been some discussions in the context of Bill C-27 federally for the Government of Canada, and the example that it sets, we certainly have that on our to-do list, if you will, to reach out to map what the provinces are doing and where there may be opportunities for us to exploit in this regard. So that's really where it is at the moment, but it's a very, very important point that you raised, Senator.
Next, Senator Lang. from Yukon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I too want to welcome Minister O'Toole to his new responsibilities, and I have to say that after listening to you for, I think it was over 10 minutes, nobody will ever be able to say that you don't know your file, which we appreciate, and I want to say I very much appreciate the fact that you obviously took the time not only to read but study the report that this particular committee brought forward, because as the chair said, we spent a lot of time, a lot of effort listening to witnesses and coming up with what I thought was some pretty realistic recommendations. That aside, I would like to pursue two elements if I could. First of all, the question by Senator White and Senator Stewart-Olson in respect to the question of the expansion within the federal government's responsibilities for the purposes of the hiring of the veterans, whether they be injured or otherwise, in respect to the priority that they're given in respect to positions. It's just not the three organizations that General Natichuk referred to. There's corporations as well, and significant numbers of corporations. And I would strongly recommend that they be, one way or the other, legislatively put under this umbrella. It's fine to say they're under the spirit, and they have the spirit, and they intend to follow it. That doesn't mean they're going to. Secondly, I would say that in respect to the provinces, and Senator Mitchell and myself have both served at the provincial territorial level, I think that you would find it unanimous across this country that if asked, all provincial governments, no matter what their political stripe, would be happy to initiate legislatively something similar to what has been proposed in this bill. And that gives that many more opportunities to those veterans who choose to go back to the Yukon or go to New Brunswick or go to Newfoundland, because the province, as we know, has the more responsibilities directly within the communities in the federal government, and it would be a good working relationship with the government of Canada. So I would strongly recommend that. In respect to the going back further to what you stated in your opening remarks about the rehabilitation and the educational aspect and the skill levels, that's another tool that we should be utilizing our provinces and our universities. And once again, it's the province and the territory has that responsibility. And if we take the steps forward, we can help pool our resources both federally, provincially, and territorially, so that we can help those individuals that need that updating in their skill sets. And so that's another area that I would strongly recommend. If we reach out at the federal level, I don't think there's a province or a territory that would say no to somehow coming to some agreements and working with those individual veterans in order to be able to ensure that they can have those opportunities that we'd like them to have. So perhaps maybe, and one other thing to conclude, Mr. Chairman, is that one of the areas that I've raised since I've been on this committee is the question of the fact that we're well over $4 billion, getting close to $5 billion a year towards the taxpayers' contribution to the Veterans Affairs. So the taxpayer, I think, is making significant contribution to ensuring that the veterans are taken care of. Yet at the same time, there's been some criticism, some of it justified, perhaps some of it not. And looking forward, there was 37 programs under the auspices, one way or the other, of the Veterans Affairs, which, quite frankly, when I looked at it, I got confused after I got through when I got from number 10 to number 11. I didn't quite figure where he or she would fit in. Just maybe you want to make that observation going forward from the point of view, your point of view, and the department.
Thank you, Senator. There's three specific parts. You said two questions, but then you snuck one in. So there's three there. Yeah, they're very effective at like that, Mr. Chair. The first one was expansion of priority hiring. I should add, just in the last week, I've exchanged correspondence with Premier McNeil in Nova Scotia. That's why I highlighted Nova Scotia as one of the provinces that does designate an MLA in that case to be responsible for sort of military affairs within the province, seeking to expand what they've created at the provincial level, and that I look forward to working with his government on that. His brother was a former chief of police in the Halifax region, so I think his family knows uniformed service well. The one part of that question you said was, should we legislate a private sector employment levels? I don't agree with that. And I'll get to where I think we can fit that in better, is Canada has not had a hire a veteran culture, in large part because, unlike our friends to the south, and my colleague Secretary MacDonald, who serves 22 million veterans, we have a population of approximately 700,000. There's been less history of programs within corporations of using the military population as a great recruiting ground. And the American military has a lot of shorter engagement people and turnover, where we have about 5,000 releasing per year, with about 1,200 being medically releasing from the Canadian Armed Forces. So a smaller population, but probably an even better educated population with more training. So we have to build that culture in, because it didn't exist 25 years ago. And I think, Senator Day would agree with that. When he was leaving the Canadian Armed Forces, there weren't recruiting programs at Royal Bank and at other companies that there are now. So we're making great progress. The provinces that, I think there's a lot more work we can do with the provinces, not just on priority hiring, but on the training piece you identified. Alberta in particular, which has experienced labor shortages, they've also had companies like TransCanada Pipelines and others indicate a sincere willingness to hire more veterans and seeing the value of hiring a veteran. We had CN, which participated in the Veterans Transition Advisory Council and appeared before your committee, that is committed to hiring veterans. BCIT, which appeared before your committee, that has been doing this in British Columbia. Recommendation 8 of your report, I think, is a good one, because where I think the government has a role of some sort is coordinating all of the efforts, provincial efforts, federal government efforts led by C-27 and our focus on this area, but also complementing what Canada Company and Wounded Warriors and Treble Victor and all these nonprofit groups are doing. Can we coordinate that better so that a veteran who starts looking at post-Canadian Forces employment can find all of this in front of them instead of having to search it out? And General Miller, the CMP from the Canadian Armed Forces, understands this, as does General Natinchuk. A man or woman leaving the Canadian Armed Forces, don't wait until their last 30 days in uniform to start thinking about transition. In fact, they may say, is this my last posting? Is this my last 3 years? I'm going to end up in Ottawa at National Defence Headquarters, or I'm going to Shiloh. Will I do a posting after that? They're constantly sort of seeing what's best for my family, and is my career rewarding, all these sorts of things. So we have to have tools out there so that when they're contemplating this, usually a year or two before ever leaving, if they're injured or if they're not injured, because if they're injured, they're still in uniform for 3 to 5 years. We have to have a better way to organize the goodwill that is out there now that it's popping up in the private sector, within government, at the provincial level. Final thing I'll say on your third issue about budget and investment, we're spending on average as a department $700 million more than the last government. But as I've said in many of my roundtables, we're spending it in different areas and in different ways, because post-Afghanistan, where we had between 30 and 40,000 people serve for 12 years, we have an environment where we have traditional war veterans in their 90s who are remarkable. Mr. Cote here in Ottawa is 101, would still beat me in an arm wrestle likely. But we also have veterans in their late 20s with serious injuries from combat who may need different services, but they will certainly want to draw their services in different ways. And even employment programs, we have to recognize that, opportunities shift and change. And so we're spending more, but we have to spend it in new ways. We have to spend it almost really smart to meet the needs of this new cohort of veterans from the Cold War and Afghanistan that have different expectations in how to draw services from Veterans Affairs.
Chairman, I just want to clarify the record here, because if I misspoke myself, I do not think the private sector should be legislated. I was talking about the province, the provincial and territorial governments, recognizing that we have to work with the private sector, but I would certainly not support legislating them either. So just for correction. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Senator Mitchell from Alberta is next.
Thanks. Thanks, Minister, for an excellent presentation and for the passion you show for your job. And it's nice to see the General here again, and just like to note his great service to the country over many, many years. I'm interested in some specifics. One is that clearly a medical reason would encompass PTSD, obviously. Is there any kind of priority, and there shouldn't be, but between PTSD because of the deployment to Afghanistan and PTSD because of the situation in Canada? Or is everybody treated equally? If they had PTSD, they had PTSD, no matter what the reason?
Can I speak to that first, General, and then I'll. Great question, and whenever I speak about our medically released or our injured, and when I meet with groups, I always speak about physical injuries from service and mental injuries from service. This is something that we're getting better at as a country, but is an area of rising need. And your own report showed that there's 13% from the Afghanistan mission that have an operational stress injury of some sort. 8% of that, 8% PTSD, which is a psychiatric diagnosis. But there can be anxiety, depression, a range of operational stress injuries. Those injuries, that type of injury as a result of service makes that veteran eligible for these programs. And as some of your witnesses have described, we have to work on not just the stigma for people to put their hand up to get support, because if they do, there's tremendous support out there for them. We also have to break down the stigma that exists somewhat in the private sector, that if someone had an operational stress injury, that they might not be suitable for employment in the future. People, men and women, can recover, can redeploy, or manage their symptoms very, very well. And I think Canadian society in the last 10 years has come to grips with talking more rationally about mental health issues broadly. And this is an area that I think the Canadian Forces has actually been leading the discussion to try and break down the barriers about talking about mental injuries from service. If you'll indulge, Senator, I speak about my predecessor quite regularly in the House and in my speeches. He was the MP for the area of Ontario I represent 100 years ago. He died as a result of service in World War I. He was re-elected in 1917 while fighting in France. Yet we only have one statue in Centre Block to George Baker, who died in World War I. And the official history said he was the only serving MP that died. No, there were two. The other one took his life. Sam Sharp, and he represented my area 100 years ago. Why I use that story is to show we have come a long way from Sam Sharp's time, when one of these significant figures in the country was not talked about because of his very sad and tragic death. We now have a network of, by the end of the year, 26 to 27 operational stress injury clinics. We're investing money. But most importantly, with the Road to Mental Readiness program the Canadian Forces is running, with the awareness, General Lawson and others within the Canadian Armed Forces in terms of encouraging a culture for people to get support, we're starting to tackle these issues better. And I look forward to continuing to work with your former colleague, retired Senator Dallaire, and others to continue to break down these stigmas, because that will actually help employers recognize that someone may have had an operational stress injury, but they sought treatment and they would be a great addition to your company. We've got to break down those barriers. General, would you like to add?
Minister, thanks very much. And I just want to reinforce what the Minister said and just add a few things. And Mr. Chair and Senator, I think what's really key here is men and women in the Canadian Forces are coming forward, unlike past generations, with regard to if they've had or suffered a mental health injury. The challenge we have is assessing whether that was a pre-existing condition or whether that mental health injury is as a result of service, and that really is the answer to your question. What is terrific is that the dialogue that's happening now in Canada is encouraging those who have kept these their situation to themselves, and they're coming forward finally. And this is addressing the stigma, and it's vital that we do it. It's a leadership issue. It's not a medical issue. It's a leadership issue. And so what I'm thrilled to hear when I'm visiting our Veterans Affairs offices is hearing for the first time veterans of World War II, Korea, the 50s, the 60s, 70s are coming forward for the first time and asking for help. And it's interesting, the research that we have in Veterans Affairs that basically over 50% of those coming to Veterans Affairs for help come to us from the second year after they release out through to 60 to 70 years after they've released. And for the most part, these are those with mental health injuries. So those who are still in uniform, that's actually a smaller proportion. The larger proportion come after the fact.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, thanks. Maybe we should put a plaque for Sam Sharp beside that.
That's my project.
Oh, great. Oh, great.
And I'm glad I have a new ally.
I encourage you, yeah, absolutely, because I also, the General mentioned leadership, and I just wanted to mention, and I don't mean to be critical at all, but Mr. Minister, you listed a great list of criteria, or of characteristics and traits that members of the armed forces bring to an employer. And one that I think you just neglected to mention, but I know you know, is leadership qualities. That one of the few places where you really learn leadership, and the leadership is outstanding. The training is in the armed forces, and I've always been extremely impressed by it from my experience with it. So, and we need that in business. We need that in government. My second question goes back to what Senator White talked about, which is the RCMP. And there is, I believe, from my observation, that the military has made great strides in a way that the RCMP hasn't yet with PTSD. I think they're trying, but it's not the same. And I noticed that the RCMP who were released are a priority 4, released for medical reasons. I think, I may have that wrong, but I think it is. And they're not a priority 1. And I'm wondering whether, Mr. Minister, you and your staff, General, are in direct contact with, say, the Commissioner Paulson and with the RCMP about the 3 to 5 years before some of their members leave for medical reasons, and PTSD, operational stress injuries. These are big, these are not insignificant matters in the RCMP, and whether you can apply or are applying the kind of methodology and approach that you're using in the armed forces. You can see that applied in the RCMP.
I'll pass it over to General Tinchik in a moment, because I think he can speak to this. He's very uniquely suited to speak to this. From what I understand, the RCMP has been looking at the Road to Mental Readiness approach that the Canadian Armed Forces has adopted, and some of the mental health expertise within the Canadian Armed Forces. And I think that is only smart, and I think some of the large police forces across the country are also looking, or should look, at the approach the Canadian Forces has taken on this, because it is seen as operational readiness, making sure that your men and women, their mental health needs are addressed, because often if these issues are caught early, or if people can actually have training and education prior to deployment or prior to that trigger, that crisis. So I know even over the course of 12 years of Afghanistan, the Canadian Armed Forces was always refining their pre-deployment training on mental health and operational stress, and their post-deployment and decompression training, so that you were equipping men and women before, supporting them after, and then creating an environment where you're encouraged to come forward to get the help, just like if you had a serious leg or a physical injury, come forward and get that help. But I think the General could probably speak to this far better than I could.
And thank you very much for the question, Senator, Mr. Chair. It's always interesting. We too are the new folks, and the wisdom of Bernard Butler and Maureen here, they'll chime in here if I go too far off track. What's interesting is that the act under which the Minister of the Department operate is focused on the Canadian Forces, and that the Veterans Affairs is a service provider for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And so you'll know better than I do that several years ago, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police decided that they would stay with the Pension Act and not move with the new Veterans Charter. So we include them in our strategic planning, our strategic policy discussions, trying to give them the options in which to move forward. So, I've met with the Commissioner of the RCMP, had his senior Human Resources Assistant Commissioner participate in all of our planning and saying we're there to provide services as they wish. But it's up to the leadership of the RCMP under the means and how they act to determine what kind of services we can provide them. And then just say with regard to the RCMP, my concern when I was the Chief of Defense was that they were poaching all of our great guys, especially my military police. So, and I would hear from the RCMP as well as the OPP Sûreté de Québec et tous les autres, the quality of the men and women coming through, and indeed wishing to offer them employment. But when it comes to providing support to the RCMP, they actually have the initiative.
Are they taking that initiative? Are they taking up on it? Because I know that in the past the offer was extended. This is several years ago. I understood this by under the Stéphane Grenier, Colonel Grenier's program of mentoring to the RCMP, and it was never taken up. They would say that apparently that they would, and then they wouldn't. And I'm wondering.
What I can say to Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, is that the RCMP are using our operational stress injury clinics. We are providing those services to them. Our Veterans Affairs offices are providing, the full suite of services to them.
Great. Thank you.
I have two senators who've indicated an interest in engaging in round two. Now, round two are the short, snappy questions and answers here, as we all know. Senator Stewart, and I'll be watching. Senator Stuart Olson, the Deputy Chair of the committee.
Thank you, Chair. Point taken. Just a quick question. Do the RCMP have access to the specialized clinics that we have set up across the country for the military?
Yeah, the General indicated that the operational stress injury clinics, including the satellite clinics and some of the ones we've been expanding, are accessible. Our hope on that strategy in terms of the network of clinics is to have geographic dispersion across the country, working alongside the Canadian Armed Forces, which operates some, and Veterans Affairs, to make sure that populations with high Canadian Forces families and veterans, but then geographic dispersion, so that we cover those families, as I indicated earlier in my remarks, that move back home after service, so that our goal is that we get to a point where almost 80% of the Canadian population is within an hour or so drive from these locations. And remember, the first operational stress injury clinic opened in my last year in the Canadian Armed Forces, 2002. So even these front-facing mental health support clinics are relatively new for Canada. And we've been rapidly expanding because, as the General said, as we're making some headway on the stigma issue, more people are coming forward, not just immediately after release. But the General's right. I'm amazed encountering Korean War veterans who had been struggling in silence for decades, but now feel there's an environment, and now they know there are resources out there. So that's a good thing, because we hate to think of those people continuing to struggle as a result of repressing some of their challenges.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Chair.
Stuart Olson, your question was short and succinct. Thank you. Senator White.
You expect the same from
So
me, I
is
think.
the-
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. General, I appreciate your comments in relation to the RCMP. I'm a retiree from the RCMP. There is still a difficult connection, though, I have to say, between the relationship between the RCMP Veterans Affairs and the retiree. When this bill first came in, I had not hundreds, but close to 100 emails from retired RCMP officers saying, are we finally going to be taken care of by Veterans Affairs, because we're not exactly sure. There really isn't an RCMP representative that we could contact if I had issues. And in fact, after I retired, if I had tried to figure out if I had a occupational stress injury, I don't know what I would have done, to be fair. So I do think there needs to be, and this isn't actually sitting on the Commissioner's desk or yours, Deputy. It's, I think, maybe sitting on the desk of the department trying to figure out where do we go. To be clear, today there's 30,000 RCMP employees, of which I think 22,000 would be eligible for Veterans Affairs afterwards. What is the step for them? Because I think it's clear for the military. I think the military understand the steps. I'm not so clear, and I have a card, I was looking for it actually, that told me who to contact at Veterans Affairs, but I've called that number post-retirement, and I can tell you their answer was, well, we're not exactly sure what support we would offer you. You should contact the local division of the RCMP, who would say we have no idea what they're talking about. So I do think we have to have a discussion going forward. Outside of this legislation, for me, is very helpful for what we want to do. But I think a further discussion around the connectivity between RCMP retirees and Veterans Affairs will be helpful to the veterans themselves of the RCMP and to Veterans Affairs. That's my question, was thank you for coming today. I hope you enjoyed your day. Sorry, I have to form this in a question zone. What do you think about that? Yeah, what do you think of it? There you go. Perfect. Thanks.
Can I just make a comment? I'll just say to Mr. Chair, Senator, when in doubt, call the great staff sergeant of the RCMP who's on my staff in Charlottetown. So I have a permanent liaison officer parked inside the organization. And when we had on the 5th of December our strategic gathering, in came the Deputy Commissioner or the Assistant Commissioner for HR, Dan Dubois, participating. So, and in coast to coast, RCMP officers, both serving and retired, are walking into our Veterans Affairs offices and getting a full suite of services. And I've met with the leadership of the RCMP Veterans Association and said to them, we're there to support them. So the door is open, and I've met with the Commissioner and provided the same information. And I haven't speaking to Mr. Guiparat, our Ombudsman, he has engaged with the senior leadership of the RCMP as well. So we're going in a full envelopment, saying that the door is open, whatever they require, we're there to serve.
Very briefly to C27, since we'll be required to vote on that in the not-too-distant future. And there were a couple of issues that were brought up by the ombudsman and others. One of them is going back to this question of attribution to service, the reason for the release and the injury. Is the assessment process, we've already talked about for attribution, that you're hoping to have better collaboration with National Defence, and so while the person's still in uniform, we can start doing some of this assessment. Is the same process to assess financial benefits and to assess eligibility to public service? Are they also assessment processes that can take place when the person is still in uniform?
Thank you, Senator. Great question. The answer is yes, that is our goal. So within that period, I mentioned in my remarks the 3 to 5 years on average that a medically releasing member of the Canadian Armed Forces remains in uniform and remains receiving their Canadian Forces salary, waiting for recovery or determination with respect to their military occupation. It is our sincere goal to have the disability claim and assessment done, but also plugging in the career or the client relationship with Veterans Affairs earlier, where all of those things could be explored. Eligibility for priority hiring, which retraining and rehabilitation options are there as we've expanded the amount of re-education, retraining that's available. Start accessing that while the person is at the JPSU, while they're in uniform. One of the important things we moved on very quickly after the Standing Committee of the House of Commons Veterans Affairs Committee report on the new Veterans Charter, which was, I think, their first recommendation, which was their most important. It's now the policy of the federal government that no one will be released from the Canadian Armed Forces until their medical situation is stabilized and until Veterans Affairs case management has connected with them and trained and began that process. Our goal in working in collaboration very quickly with the Canadian Armed Forces and Chief of Military Personnel is to make sure that happens quite early after a service-related injury so that we can use that time to work with the man or woman on their transition plan. I say in my remarks quite regularly, there's 3 successes, and it's all through in your report, but I'm distilling it into the 3 I like to use. There's 3 prongs of success for someone transitioning out of the Canadian Armed Forces. Health, and we're making sure they are medically stable and all that stuff taken care of. Family wellness and career transition. If any one of those 3 doesn't go well, it affects the other 2. So if there's a challenge with career transition, that can affect stresses on the family. Same with health. We had cases in the past where people were leaving before the full extent of their injury may have been known. That doesn't allow us to set them up on the right health and vocational rehabilitation plan if the extent of their injury is not understood. If you let me, Senator Day, 2 of the stats I had hoped to have in my remarks I'd written down but couldn't find in my my marked-up copy of your report. When I spoke about the Life After Service study and the focus on women, the statistic that I was struck in your report was women veterans experience a 30% decline in income following in their first 3 years following release. So that shows why we need to drill down further on medically released who have higher unemployment, and then some of our female veterans who don't have the outcomes we'd like to see.
Thank you. And there were a couple of other points that were brought up, and I think it would be helpful for us to have your comment on. And one of them was the survivor of a veteran, and that definition wasn't changed. So it's the veteran in that particular instance is a veteran of the Korean War or the Second World War. So the survivor, let's say, is the wife. My wife is likely to be in excess of 70 years of age now, and yet we're still in the act giving a priority or a preference for hiring for that person, but not for the survivor of other veterans. And the term veteran has the priority is given to other veterans with the change here in C-27 to 3 years and honorably discharged or honorably released. So was that an oversight not to change the definition with respect to the survivor of the veteran? Or am I misinterpreting the legislation?
I'll say something quickly on that before passing to Mr. Butler more specifically. One thing that the new Veterans Charter has done better, and it's been a focus of our government, has been the veteran's family. I speak about that regularly. And you'll notice your own study indicates in some detail the fact that vocational rehabilitation training and re-education can be transferred to the survivor. So those sorts of inherent recognition is there to make sure that the transition is available for family under the vocational rehab or in some of the benefits. So the family's been more of an active participant. Our changes to make sure that family have had a massive increase in the amount of psychological counseling available, because we do know that an operational stress injury of a serving member causes repercussions for the family. And in that three-pronged approach to transition, if the family wellness is not there, it won't help the veteran's transition. In terms of the timeframes selected for the Act, the 5-year timeframe for C-27 was selected based on the fact that the 5-year program, or the 5-year period of time, allowed for vocational rehabilitation to be part of that transition, so that the member could take advantage of re-education, retraining to qualify for a federal government opportunity. The same general approach wanted to be there for survivor as well. And specific on that.
So would you be open to an amendment to make sure that the survivor of the veteran is a modern-day veteran as well?
I think one thing we would add is, the goal of this hiring program is to plug someone with the exceptional skills and services they gained in the Canadian Armed Forces into another part of the job. We wanted to extend that as well to the family somewhat, but the priority still remains on the serving member because of that inherent service and training they've gained in the Canadian Armed Forces. I can only suggest that that's possibly the reason why there was a slight difference, is the focus really is on that serving member, recognizing they've served the federal government in perhaps the highest form of service, which is the unlimited liability that's inherent in donning a uniform. I would suggest that's likely why there was a slightly different threshold for a survivor who has not served in the military.
We almost, sorry, Mr. Butler, were you going to add something there?
No, I would simply, I think, confirm really what the minister is suggesting. And certainly I would not suggest that it was an oversight at the time.
It might be better just to take out the provision giving a preference to the survivor. When you know the survivor is over 80 years of age, it doesn't make any good drafting sense to have it still in there. But that's a comment. It has been made by others as well, and I just wanted to pass it on to you so you can think about that one. And going back to the 5 years to determine whether the veteran is eligible for employment in the public service, after he or she is determined to be eligible, there's another 5-year period provided for in the legislation, and there's some question as to why is that capped at 5 years? Was that because of the Public Service Commission wanting some sort of a finite top out to that, or why is the second 5 years in there at all? Why couldn't it be once they're ready for employment, then there's no limit on time?
Thank you, Senator. I certainly wasn't minister at the time this was being drafted, but I spoke probably more than any other MP in the House on the bill. What I can say is this: the 5-year period, as I indicated, was selected to try and make sure they could take advantage of the rehabilitation and re-education opportunities provided for a veteran. And I think the goal of transition, written all through your report, and the goal of the new Veterans Charter really, is to help with that transition piece. So the extended period, I think, comes from the fact that as the veteran is engaged in vocational rehabilitation and training and potential post-secondary education, all these sorts of things, they may then determine after the education piece that they want to work within Department of Finance, or so they may find that the rehabilitation process itself leads to a new career path, so that the extra period was to recognize we want to encourage a quick and seamless transition, because the more success in your first few years out of uniform, the more likelihood overall wellness is achieved. So the goal was to always encourage that transitional piece up front, and then the expanded time, I think, is just recognizes the fact that that training may lead to a new career opportunity, and we want to make sure that priority hiring is still available. Is there anything to add specifically?
Mr. Chair, I just want to make a couple of remarks and reinforce what the minister has indicated. But also from anecdotal, from knowing a lot of the soldiers who had some of the most serious injuries, what was really tough is that they didn't want to leave their units for like years. And we try to encourage them to go to school, try to encourage them on a number of paths. And it was so important for them to be part of their regimental squadron ship family. They didn't want to leave. And it's tough to actually encourage them to go when they have sacrificed so much. What I'm thrilled is, having seen some of them over the past couple of years, about after 5 years since their injury, they're of the mindset that they're ready to move on. Many of their peers have moved on, and they're doing other things, and they're ready to move on. So that's why, as I'm being briefed on this 5 years, I'm kind of comfortable based upon what I'm hearing.
Yes.
But also then that second window of 5 years, you want them to get into something, whether it be with the public service, whether it be with industry, because it's so important to their health. And if they're unable, if they personally, because of their injuries, whether it be physical or mental, unable to handle it, then it's so important for their partners and spouses to have that opportunity to contribute to the family. That's why I'm very comfortable with what's being laid out here.
5 years and 5 years. Yep. Now, thank you very much. You hear the bell ringing. Mr. Minister, thank you very much for being with us. This is a very, very good discussion and very helpful to us. Mr. Natinchuk, thank you, and good luck to both of you. And I'm sure that Ms. Sinnott and Mr. Butler will keep a close eye on both of you. Meeting now concluded. Thank you.